I'm a senior producer, product owner, certified Scrum Master with Last Call Media, KS Albrecht on the internet. You can find the original version of this talk on lastcallmedia.com. It's a few years old now. This iteration of it looks nothing like the original one, so don't worry, you won't be reading things over again. Okay, so Last Call Media, we have this thing where we enjoy work with purpose, building engaging solutions that assist and support organizations who are working to improve their communities, right? We went through this period as a lot of agencies did. Who here is a Drupal developer? Most people, all right. So there was this period of time where we basically fell in love with Drupal. We were the trusted technology experts that people asked us, how do we want to solve this content management problem? And we all said, Drupal, hands down, of course, right? So over a period of years of a lot of that, we all sold Drupal to the world, right? We loved Drupal. We were creators of Drupal. We were participating in the Drupal community, helping to create it as a solution that we would recommend and later implement as a solution, right? We wanted the work. We wanted to solve the problems that needed Drupal as a solution. It was fun. We knew what we were doing. We knew how to solve these problems. We had a tool that we were a part of making, and we wanted to use that tool to solve these problems. It felt good making a living doing this. We wanted people to know us and trust us. We wanted them to know how much we cared about their needs. We wanted people to want us to help them. So as a community of trusted experts, we solved a lot of problems, and we created a lot of Drupal in the process. So, like most things, if you create it, you're the best person to support it, right? So if you created a family, now you have to support it. If you created a business, now you have to support it. If you created a solution for something, now you have to support it. If we created some Drupal, now we have to support it. Thank you. That's the talk. That's the title of the talk today. Basically, creation is fun. Support is hard. Creation is exciting, and support is consuming. Support is sustainability of that thing. Support is, it's not just involved with Drupal. Support is putting shoes on your kids. Support is that emotional labor that it takes to care about something, right? And support is hard. Support is that hard, mundane, day in and day out kind of work that needs to get done every day or things start falling apart. So here's a little story about supporting some creations. I have 3 kids, and this thing happens in my home, in my household, where we'll get to the end of a loaf of bread, someone will finish it, and if I'm lucky, they'll throw the bag away. But for some reason, one of these little guys, little bread ties, ends up on the counter. It's its new home. It's just sitting there, right? And I confess in the past to walking by one of these bread ties and thinking, oh, maybe somebody left that there because they're going to come back and use it later. I wouldn't want to throw that out and throw out this thing they're saving for later. And I wouldn't touch it, or I'd know it was on there. There it is. Who leaves these things around? Or I wouldn't even notice it at all. But if I did notice it, I confess to thinking, I've got more important things to do. I'm moving fast. I'm getting out to work. Someone else can pick up this bread tie, right? I confess that I've grown a lot of ways, but in the past, it almost seemed like it was my wife's job to pick up these bread ties, right? So you have to ask yourself, right, whose job was it to pick up these bread ties? Whose job is this to pick up this random bread tie, right? It's not cool at all that it would be my wife's job. That's not cool, right? So in some sense, if you see something, say something is something that's popular to say these days, but I could have picked up this bread tie, right? And that is an example of the type of caring and consideration that support is that is often involved in support. So I've been thinking about support a lot, and by thinking about it a lot, I thought of these types of things. So because Last Call Media does a lot of support. We've created a lot of Drupal. We've created modules. We've created a lot of big, complicated Drupal sites for clients. And we need to think about support right to be able to provide continued support for those creations. Okay, so I've been thinking about support a lot, and I started thinking about the little things that you can do to better support something. And this bread tie is an example of that. But I took this thinking with me to work one day. Okay, and so I went into work, and on this particular day, I just really wanted a cup of coffee. I wanted a cup of coffee so bad. And we have this really cool coffee machine at work. You push a button and it grinds the beans, and it makes you 1 cup of coffee, and it tastes really delicious. And so I got into work, and I headed back to the back kitchen, and I got my coffee mug, and I got to the coffee machine, and there was already a mug there, just sitting there. And above the mug, there were these error lights just blinking, okay? So I thought to myself, oh my God, okay, how do I get... Well, first, I thought this is one of those bread ties, right? This is one of those little tiny support things that somebody said, not my problem, not my job. I'm just going to leave my cup here and go walk down into town and buy a cup of coffee. This thing's not working, whatever. So I thought to myself, this is one of those bread ties. I'm going to figure out what this error light is, because whose job is it? So that's what I asked myself, right? So with the bread tie example, whose job is it? So I thought, whose job is it to fix these error lights on this coffee machine, right? Do I just leave it for somebody else to do? I thought to myself, I'm going to figure out what this is. So I looked up, I had to find the manual. I didn't just say like, hey, where's the manual for this thing? I looked through the drawers and I found the manual. And I looked through the manual, and I found the page where the error lights were, and what the error was that the machine needed to be descaled. Does anybody know what descaling is? All right, well, it needed to be descaled, and I thought, all right, I think I've seen descaler before. So I looked through some more drawers, and I found something that was decalcifier. Okay, so rather than just, yelling off into the office, hey, is decalcifier the same as descaler? No, I Googled it, and it was, okay? So I had my tool, and I started following the 9-step process, and I got all the way to step 8, which was repeat steps 1 through 7 until the lights go out. This can take 45 minutes to an hour and a half. So at this point, it was like, whose job is it to descale these coffee machines? Okay, so I tried, and I chatted the team and said, hey, I got this to step 8. If anybody else can take this the rest of the way, we'll get this thing descaled. And so I felt like that was a pretty good compromise. But really, I think the interesting thing about these two is one of them, right? So you can consider the difference between responsibility and accountability, right? So when I made it to this coffee machine error and I wanted to know whose job is it to descale these coffee machines, right? It's basically you're saying who's accountable to the maintenance of the coffee machine in the office. And so that's one thing in a business, right? Because you can just make someone accountable for it. It can be part of somebody's job description to maintain the kitchen appliances or something. Up to this point, it was the other type of thing. It was a responsibility, a shared responsibility. And the danger with shared responsibility is that if everyone's responsible, oftentimes no one's responsible. And you can solve this in a business by making someone accountable. Right? So you're accountable to the maintenance of this thing. You don't necessarily have to be the responsible party for fixing it, but you can be the accountable party to make sure that it gets fixed. So that could be hiring someone in a particular instance, to delegating the task to someone. You can solve these things in a business by making people accountable. But in your family, you can attempt to make people accountable to things, but they can leave. It's still the family, even I have kids, and it's a constant it's a constant challenge to teach them about responsibility, but they're doing the best they can. They don't always pick up their stuff after them. A lot of times they leave piles. In the end, they can get older and move out. So really, you can't ever get past this shared responsibility concept with the people that you're in a family with, right? So, so in a lot of senses, it doesn't actually happen, and you're stuck with this situation. So let's think about open source, of which Drupal is. Drupal is an open source project. Open source is by definition a shared responsibility, right? Nobody owns it, okay? All people that are working on it are volunteering their time. You're free to partake in it. The code is shared, and so is the responsibility, right? You can't just force accountability on people because they don't have to be doing it in the first place. And they could just go do something else, right? So it's something we all willingly partake into. And anything that there is to do in supporting it is up to us to do, right? So it's a shared responsibility. And if you prefer open source, you also possibly unknowingly prefer a shared responsibility, right? So you can think about what's enjoyable about sharing a responsibility with a number of people, right? So open source is inherently inclusive and collaborative. The vast majority of participation is driven by intrinsic motives for personal growth, relationships, and helping others. It is an endeavor that creates actual happiness, dedication, and community. And as a society, it's some of our best work to work together. I think it's enjoyable. It strikes at a chord of what we like to do and what we like to do with others and what we like to share with others. And we're sharing that responsibility. And it's enjoyable. And it's different, in a lot of great ways from the forced accountability that you end up with in a business. It has an intrinsic value to each of us, right? It isn't just a letter grade or a paycheck, right? It's something that we all feel deeply in terms of something that we're all doing together, something that we're sharing, right? And that makes it, by nature of what it is, a shared responsibility. And in that sense, it's the business of caring, of consideration, of sharing, right? Given given enough eyeballs, you may have heard this said, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, right? In open source. So that's that's one of the things that makes it work, supposedly, is that we're all involved, being active in this shared responsibility. So it is, in essence, the business of being an active set of eyeballs in a shared vision. So what does this have to do with Drupal, right? So there's this saying in Drupal where you come for the code, but you stay for the community, right? So that's a big part of it, the community of all of us, of what we're doing in Drupal, of what we're sharing in, right? So we're all together sharing in this Drupal and sharing in the responsibility of supporting it. So we can ask ourselves, what are some of the bread ties that are hiding out in supporting Drupal? What are some of those things that we can notice that we may have felt too important for or too busy for doing as we just scampered off to something more exciting? Maybe we're doing something more exciting with Drupal and we're just running past all of these little bread ties. So what are those little things that we could be doing to help support Drupal better? It can be overwhelming, right? So I found myself in today's keynote thinking a little bit like, well, heck yeah, I agree completely. We should be contributing to Drupal. We should be doing that, whatever that is, right? We should be contributing. What does that mean, right? And I think trying to find ways, especially if you're not already a module maintainer, trying to find ways to figure out how to contribute to Drupal can feel a little bit like a little overwhelming anyway. You almost feel like you have to get to the top of this learning curve before you can know what you can contribute to. But I would like to say that I think that there are tons of those little bread ties out there that need to get picked up, need to get thrown away so our kitchen can be clean and tidy and not overwhelming all of us and burning us out by, a pile of someone's shirt that they didn't want to bring up to their room and it's just hanging over a chair, or someone's little piece of something or other over here. So what are some of those bread ties, right? How are people doing? Can you think of any bread ties in supporting Drupal?
Yeah, writing good documentation.
Good documentation, yep. Any others?
Testing patches that have already been written.
Beautiful.
Patches are sitting there waiting for you to just sign off on them, say the work. It's that simple.
Yep. I'm trying to think of a way to get a kind of a sense of the level that people are at in the room. Like, are there any module maintainers in the room? So you could probably think of some little things that, you're maintaining them.
It's the module that I created 3 years back. I haven't done that for a long time. I mean,
but you might commiserate with some of the, even a core maintainer, a module maintainer. You might know as a module maintainer, you've made yourself accountable to this whole thing. And in some senses, you do have more important things to do than to pick up all the little bread ties. But you know about them. And I submit to you that this is a major cause of burnout for module maintainers, where they're holding themselves accountable to the usability of this big, complicated thing, and they're not getting help, even with the little things. Right? So there could be some patches that fix some things and the patch has something wrong with it, or the patch doesn't have tests attached to it, or a patch has been submitted to it, or a bunch have been submitted and they haven't been reviewed and they're just waiting to get reviewed. There are lots of ways. I think you guys mentioned a couple of really good ones. Even minor code style cleanup. You could submit a patch for that, clean some things up. Another one that isn't even always related to Drupal, but can apply to just the general support and tidiness of your team dynamics, is just keeping notes updated and clear. Spending a little bit of extra time to write something out that will make sense to everybody will help in this way. And even documentation outside of the code, especially since Drupal 8 is released, there's a lot of documentation to be kept up to date. There's lots of little places that you can help. Anything that makes a developer's life easier, I think, is fair game, right? So there's lots of little things that can be done that I think are being overlooked. There's been a lot of talk about this, kind of in different contexts, but the idea of trying to encourage more what are being called code gardeners to be involved in the Drupal scene, where you're looking for those small little things that could be tidied up. So there's a lot of that's just people barely have time for doing the big parts of the work that they're contributing to, and never, not to mention getting to the smaller pieces. All right, so touched a little bit on this, but in closing, I want to consider how we think about our shared responsibility, right? Or our shared responsibilities in general. The easiest way to think about them, if we choose to think about them at all, is to think about what they mean to our own deeply personal existence, right? So I have a shared responsibility of keeping the sink clean of dishes. Does anybody else have this responsibility? Right? So the easiest thing for each one of ourselves to do in our own heads is to think about what that responsibility. So for me, what does that responsibility mean to me? And to me personally, I could let that sink pile up. I could stack dishes on the counter. I could go about my business and not really worry about it, to me personally. But to those that I share the responsibility with, right, that might not be the same thing, right? Are we thinking about these shared responsibilities in the context of what they mean to those we share them with? And that's the important piece, right? So if I'm basically being self-centered about what my shared responsibilities are, and I'm letting this thing pile up all of the time, that is, I think that's going to burn some people out. That's being pretty inconsiderate to the people that I share the responsibility with, right? So if you're like me, you have a large number of shared responsibilities that are of little concern to you personally, right? And I think that's normal. That's kind of our default way of thinking about it. It takes an extra step to think about something that would matter to those that I share something with, even though they might not be so important to me. But it can be a game changer to start noticing, to start thinking about what matters to those you share something with, and start taking an initiative to kind of support things in that way. We need to make time and focus on our shared responsibilities for the sake of what we are supporting, but also for the sake of who we are supporting it with. Okay? Burnout among core and module maintainers is a tremendous challenge right now, especially in the context of today's keynote, where we're at that critical mass, that tipping point. You don't have to dig too far on the internet to find a lot of really heartfelt, lengthy blog posts by people involved in maintaining Drupal core about what's burning them out. And a lot of it has to do with them being accountable for things that they don't necessarily have the power to get the help that they really do need. The cobbler's children, you may have heard some of these. Cobbler's children have no jewels. Baker's children don't eat cake. The goldsmith's children, sorry, let me start over. Goldsmith's children have no jewels. Baker's children don't eat cake. Cobbler's children have no shoes, right? So you can ask yourself, how much time does one thing take? Everyone knows the scenarios well, having to prioritize what one creates and supports in a day, often not getting to everything, with some things never being gotten to. What is it about the tasks we don't seem to ever be able to get to doing? You may hear this referred to as cobbler's kids situation, right? And so to relate this to shared responsibility, if putting shoes on your kids, metaphorically speaking, is a two-person job, you better be putting in 50%, whether you care about shoes or not. Otherwise, you risk burning out those that do and jeopardize the bigger picture, which you do care about. So let's be aware. Let's be those eyeballs. Let's also seek further awareness. Let's be on the lookout for all the little ways we each might be able to help more, and ask, whose job is this? Right? When you see something, let that be a question that you run through your head. Like, here's a little thing that could maybe get done. Whose job is it to do this? Here's a patch in the issue queue. Whose job is it to review this patch? Right? Here's a solved. Somebody has solved something, but they haven't added a test to it. Whose job is it to make sure that all the tests are added? Maybe you could say to yourself, maybe I could help do this. So you can ask, whose job is this? And if you see a bread tie, pick it up. Thank you. So I think I overcompensated a little bit because this talk, I talked a lot about, previous versions of this talk, I talked a lot about how my company, Last Call, would do a lot of support work, and it would jeopardize the new builds that we would do, because the support work is just a major, if you're trying to do it all the wrong way, support work is a major interruption to any new work that you're doing. And so I talked a lot about how that was a big interruption, and how everybody hated support work, and how we almost lost some big new job because they were also support clients of ours, and we were doing not a great job at support, and they were concerned that we weren't going to be able to handle their new build. So I've got a whole lot more on this topic, but I think the real essence of it has to do with doing those little things that help to support Drupal. Who here is a supporter? Who supports Drupal in some way? As the module that you maintain? And
the agency I work for.
Yep. You guys provide support?
Support services.
Do you have a dedicated support team? Yeah.
Our team's about 40, and we have some people that are more dedicated for actual full development.
Yep.
That I haven't seen on support, but I've also worked with these same people at other agencies on support, so they've got.
Yeah. So there's support of doing support work for the clients, and kind of doing the little pieces that they need done that don't really add up to their being its own project. And then there's also supporting Drupal in terms of contributing back to Drupal. But for supporting clients, we used to say that we only schedule, like in the sales process, we only schedule everybody 70%. So they have 30% free time to handle any support tasks that pop up. And what we found out is that is making support kind of a shared responsibility that is just a big interruption to what you really want to be working on, which is what you're scheduled for 70% of your time. So it turned out that the true solution for that as an agency was to have a dedicated support team where they could be committed and interested in the support work as it kept coming, and it never was an interruption. It was the focus. So that was a big thing in terms of supporting Drupal and supporting clients with Drupal projects for us. But, all right. Unless there are any other questions. Yep.
Might be kind of a more drawn-out question, but in regards to estimates and estimation.
Yep.
So specifically dealing with projects that you did not build, so this is built from an external party, you have no idea where it's coming from.
Yep.
Some people like to perform an audit process before that site actually comes into the support plan.
Yep.
That.
Right.
And then even at that point, so there's still only so much time, so many things that you can actually discover about a site, how things are built, the methods of implementation, that sort of thing. What's the generalized approach or kind of a generic approach for handling estimations? Some people like to say, this is what I think it would take, and then add so many percent or times it by pi, or there's some sort of multiplier added to it to kind of account for those unforeseen things. So just curious.
So what we've landed on, because we've tried that. Well, actually, what I think worked best was when I was the project manager, I would get to know each of the developers, and I would kind of get a sense like, this person tends to be under by 30%, or I need to double this person's estimates, or something like that. But that didn't scale well when we started hiring project managers, and that just wasn't their style. It didn't make sense. So right now we do, most things have a minimum of 4 hours. So that, and then a lot of times, if the person doing the work doesn't feel like they know enough about it to commit to any sort of estimate, we just ask for time to look into it. And if we need more time, we need more time. But yeah, I think with what you were saying about an audit, we've definitely been in that situation where we charged a whole bunch of money to do an audit, and it was almost like us getting, our responsibility for it getting bought. Like, well, you did this audit. You should know. Now you should know everything there is to know. Yeah. So, I think a lot of it is kind of like a soft skill, like a communication with setting expectations, where it's like, well, estimates, there's things you can say like, estimates by definition are wrong. Like it wouldn't be called an estimate if it was going to be exactly on exactly right. Especially in cases where you need to find out more or you're not sure, definitely make sure to say things like, well, we'll spend up to this much, we'd like to request this much time to look into it. Maybe we'll solve it within that much time, but we're not sure. I think a lot of it is having the confidence to say you don't know. I think there's a lot, it takes a lot of experience to build that confidence, because the fear is that, well, if I say I don't know, they're just going to hire someone that's going to say they do know.
I work for a company where we have a support entity and we do site audits for clients that come in, our manager support organization. And we used to have it before I came there, to where you would have time set in for, like you said, 70%, and then the 30% of the developers doing the work for the support.
Yeah.
And so it was determined that having a clear-cut support organization that focused on those clients for either one, the products or the sites that we built, that then they wanted ongoing maintenance, or what we then begin to do is bring in clients that for sites that we did not do. So we make it mandatory to do the site audit, and I price them pretty low so that I can get them in the door. It gives me the opportunity to build a revenue from a support perspective. And then as I have them as long-term clients, then I can push them back over to the production side for if they wanted to do really update of the site or a bigger project. So I price the site audits pretty low, get them in the door. I do, look at architecture, build, just kind of give them a technical audit. And then I give that information back to them as a tangible report that I call a snapshot of their site. But then we give them also short-term and long-term recommendations that lead into larger work that fits within the support entity. What we ended up doing was kind of outsourcing our support. So our developers, front-end developers and engineers, they focus on our bigger projects. But then I have a team of folks that I work with that are kind of outsourced, that's focused specifically on the support work. I guess I have maybe about 25 to 30 clients that are in support right now. Probably about 5 to 7 that I've pulled in for sites that we did not build. I have an organization that I work with, and they specifically do the support work. So they do my audits. They talk to the clients about the audits. And so I try to tailor that around kind of the needs of the client.
Yeah. So, for the estimation piece of that, it's just, you got to be real, that you can't expect somebody to just know everything and predict everything.
And so we do we'll say, okay, for this amount of work, we estimate this to be, say, 3 hours, 5 hours. But if it looks like it's going to go over that, then you have to definitely communicate to the client. Yeah,
right. If there's going to be bad news, deliver it as soon as possible. Yeah. Yeah. Does that cover what you were asking?
Yeah, just a conversation of how our estimates can approach. I imagine too that differs between like a feature request versus a bug request, things that you do have some sort of clear direction on how to deliver versus I don't want to.
Yeah.
Got to do some discovery, and I don't know what.
Yeah. It's real. I think the crux of it is to empower the people who are going to be doing the work to, if they're not sure, to don't be sure. Don't. The worst thing you can do is confidently say it's going to be 2 hours when you don't know. Yep.
So my organization also has a lot of support clients, and one of the things you mentioned that you initially had people 70% time booked on your builds, and then 30% it was everybody's responsibility whatever comes in.
Yep.
So we were in a similar kind of situation, and what we've been able to do is now for most of our clients we've been able to sell them a yearly contract of say 6 sprints without even defining what the work is.
Yep.
So it's you have 6 sprints in a year, and of course if something critical comes up somebody has to fix it, right? But otherwise, regular continuous development, feature enhancement, things like that. Instead of doing that ad hoc, what we encourage our clients to do is our product owners work with their product owners to build a backlog.
Yep.
And whenever we feel, okay, we have a week's worth or 2 weeks worth.
Yeah. Yep.
That kind of a model is working much better for us.
Oh, right. Yeah. Especially, the big part about that solves it, I think, is that the focus. Focus on it. Yeah.
We kind of, not all clients buy it, but most of them have that.
Yeah, we have a number of clients where they don't want to pay for sprints. A sprint costs a lot more. They'll buy with us. They buy right now. The way we're doing is we'll sell like a block of retainer hours, and then we'll just prioritize the tasks as they come in. We'll just prioritize them and do them, and log the time against their retainer. But yeah, I think it would be much more manageable from our side if we could do everything.
Like, 2-3 sprints per year, like depending on the scale, they can anticipate this much work.
Yep.
They've been doing every year.
And I think you touched on this a little bit, but for stuff that can't wait, if it can't wait to be part of a batch that would go into a sprint, like they need this, like I need this 4-hour task done this week.
Yeah, that depends on that's only a small set of clients that we have who are like on a retainer kind of, or in the warranty period, only they are applicable for that. But
right.
For the other stuff, we do still try to accommodate, like if something is urgent, like if security patch, something like that, then we do definitely.
Yeah, because we have a number of clients where we do quarterly support updates. So every quarter we just run through all the sites and do the updates on them. And there's a default 4-hour estimate. We actually, in our contracts, we have a minimum of 4 hours approved for each quarter for the updates for each site. So yeah, those wouldn't really fit in those sprints. But yeah, I mean, the ultimate goal is to group everything together and then put a whole build team on it. Yeah, that's an ideal for sure. The other part that was in my talk before was supporting Drupal in the context of participating in camps like this. Right, so we did a camp. I used to do DrupalCamp up in Massachusetts, and when I started thinking about ways to support Drupal better and ways to bring people into the community more, I thought, well, if I repurpose this camp, I need to make this camp more inclusive and more inviting and more approachable. And one of the challenges with a Drupal camp is that it can be a little intimidating, right? Because it can be intimidating to people that haven't chosen Drupal yet, right? Because you can think like, oh, well, I don't know if that camp's for me or not, but I don't do Drupal, so I'm not going to go. So I repurposed the Drupal camp in Massachusetts to be about just any, web technology. So we had sessions on Joomla, we had sessions on WordPress, we had things on Ruby on Rails, and it became more of a generalist camp. And attendance of the camp doubled. So it was pretty cool. My end goal was that I need to get more people to this camp so they can see how awesome Drupal is and then choose Drupal. So it was kind of like get more people to choose Drupal, but first you had to make Drupal be a choice to begin with. That was an interesting thing about that. All right. Yep. Oh, we're done.
Oh no, I was just putting my head in. That's all.
We were just in the Q&A. Cool. All right. Any more questions? All right. Yep. Thanks. Thank you.